Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. This is Eco Climate. This is where we speak about climate and issues affecting the continent of Africa. I have a great panel today to discuss about the COP27, which just ended a few weeks ago. And on my left, I have, on immediate left, I have Amos Wemanya from Power Shift Africa. Amos is awesome and very passionate about issues to do with the environment in Africa and has been so much into this. Actually, it was in COP27, so he'll be telling us much about it. On the extreme left, I have Daniel Wanjuki from EcoSafe Africa, another great speaker when it comes to matters environment. Again, joining us from the coastal town of Mombasa is Omar Elmawi, who is a coordinator of a Stop EACOP campaign. Elmawi is also a wonderful young man who is so passionate about conservation of environment, not just in Kenya, but also in the continent of Africa. So welcome, guys, and it's nice to have you today in our show. This is a wonderful platform whereby our focus is to talk about climate issues in the region of, in the continent of Africa. And you are Africans, and everything about you is Africa. Amos is talking about Power Shift Africa. Wanjuki is talking about EcoSafe Africa. Elmawi, again, as others said, speaking about Africa. This is our continent. Karibuni sana.
Thank you.
Now, we'll be talking about the just concluded COP27, and you remember a lot came up there. But before then, we want us to look at what's happening in the coastal city and the coastal region of Kenya. That is in Tana River County, where we are having now the Blue Economy Conference going on. I think this is the fourth one or fifth one since they began. But before then, you can introduce yourselves, and then from there we look at it, and then we move forward to other issues we have lined up for today, guys.
Okay, thanks so much for having me today, and I'm really pleased to be on this show. My name is Amos Wemanya. I work with an organization called Power Shift Africa. As the name suggests, we are shifting power on the continent because Africa is very much blessed with abundant resources. We are not poor. Africa is not poor. And Africa needs to tell its stories. And I'm pleased that we are doing that today.
Nice. Thank you, Karibu sana.
Thank you. Viewers, my name is Daniel Wanjuki. I'm a lead expert. I'm an environmentalist at heart. I'm also an innovator on matters that can help us adapt to climate or at least stop the climate change. I am the CEO of EcoSafe Africa. Our job is mainly to manage wastewater, but it stretches all the way up to how to prevent methane generation into the environment and how to actually stop the crimson tide, we are calling it the red, the increase in our temperatures, the global temperatures, which can be done in Africa because every day God gives us sunshine, and every part of Africa we could grow trees, we could grow crops that can absorb carbon, and while other countries are covered by snow for a big part of the year, maybe 3 months or so, Africa gets sunshine. Every inch of Africa gets sunshine every day. So whatever we do in Africa, whether it's solar energy, wind energy, planting of crops that can absorb carbon, it will be successful and it can save the world. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Elmawi, you can also introduce yourself, of course, from the coastal city of Mombasa.
Thank you, my brother, for inviting me. Name is Omar Elmawi, and I am now the Executive Director of Muslims for Human Rights, Muhuri, and I also do quite a lot of work in trying to facilitate a conversation on movement on several issues, including climate change in the whole continent. So I'm seeing myself doing a lot of work to try and promote and make people see that Africa is not necessarily a continent of problems, but we can actually be a continent of solutions. So that's sort of what I'm trying to do, what I'm involved with, and I'm happy to be here to have this important discussion.
Nice to see you, Elmawi. A few weeks after we left COP, that is Sharm El-Sheikh, we were with Elmawi there, and also Amos talking about the issues with the COP27, which of course we'll be diving into. But before then, Elmawi, I will start with you. You are at the coast, and of course this this Blue Economy Conference is ongoing, began I think a few days ago. You can tell us what is happening around there and what we are talking about when you speak about the blue economy.
Thanks, my brother. So for everyone's information, there's definitely the fourth, what they call the Jumuiya Agriculture Blue Economy Investment Conference. The acronym is JABEC. It's happening in the Tana River area this month, and several important key stakeholders have made their way from the 6 coastal counties. We're talking about Mombasa, Kilifi, Kwale, Tana River, and Lamu, and Taita Taveta, trying to sit and figure out a way to really push an idea that would be catalyzing economic growth for the people within the 6 different coastal regions. So it's a conversation that's happening. I think it's important because for us to be able to proceed and prosper as a community and as a nation, we have to find ways of working together because the challenges are similar, if not the same. And it's only by coming together that we realize and find the different options and solutions we can implement to move together as a region, which is the coastal region, but then also as a country. So conversations still happening, reporting on that in terms of the decisions and determinations that will be coming from them.
Nice. Thank you, Elmawi. Of course, Amos, you can say something about the ongoing conference, of course, about the blue economy. I'm sure you have something to say about it as we proceed.
I'm glad that various stakeholders are meeting to discuss about blue economy because nature has been very benevolent to us. It has provided us with everything we need, including sea and land ecosystems have provided us with the air we breathe, the food we eat, our well-being, our livelihoods. And in this case, the oceans are very key for Kenya. For the coastal communities, we have so many communities that depend on fishing as their source of livelihoods. So coming together to protect such an important ecosystem, I think is very important, but also to identify ways of benefiting from this resource. I've already mentioned fishing, but also we all know that tourism is very key, not just for the coastal region, but for this country. The sea at the coast, the serenity of that environment attracts tourists to come and enjoy that environment, and that brings revenue to the economy, but also benefit the local communities at the coastal region of Kenya. So it's good that stakeholders are meeting, and I'm hoping that one of the things that they'll be discussing there is the way to protect this important resource from destruction. Recently, we've seen a lot of loss in biodiversity. Loss in biodiversity is one of the major threats that the world is facing today. So seeing various actors coming together, I think such discussions would be important because when we protect these biological resources like the sea, I think we'll be protecting lives, we'll be protecting our livelihoods, we'll be protecting our communities.
Nice. I'm sure, Wanjuki, the fact that you're within inland, let's say, there's something maybe you can tell us, being an expert in science, you can tell us something about what is happening now with this blue economy. What does that mean to the coastal people?
Thank you. I actually did a paper sometime for, I think, the conference. I don't know. I remember putting in some information on how communities in the coast can actually help or adapt to climate change, and also what the opportunities for growth. When you think of the blue economy, it is the resources that we have that could actually help the country in climate adaptation. If we did mangroves along the coastline and they promoted the growth of mangroves, we're actually going to have a carbon sink a ready carbon sink. That's a crop that's a plant that grows vigorously. So if we planted a lot of mangroves, that's a way of actually improving on our carbon sinks, and that will actually improve on climate change itself. There are also opportunities like growth of bamboo along in areas like Kirifi, where the weather is very suitable for that. Bamboo could also help us reduce the demand for virgin forest, where we go cutting trees and converting them into firewood, furniture, stuff. Bamboo can actually take up that, and so we can reserve our forest for the climate control or climate change adaptation. When you think of farming, fish farming, like what is being experimented on cage farming, or even if we improve our fishing industry along the coastline, we are actually going to get food for our communities. And the ocean is a vast resource. What we've done in the past is that we've not taken it seriously. So our fishermen still go to the ocean on a dugout canoe. That is risky, that it couldn't bring much more than a family, just for sustaining a family. Our blue economy, the outlook should be that we should have maritime management, the management of the ocean resource. Fishing should be not by foreign countries who come and troll the whole of the ocean line and take away our resources, including smothering our coral reefs. We should be the one managing that, because when you know that you are still going back tomorrow to do fishing in the same area, you may not want to carry the mother, the child, and the eggs together. But that's what happens when we allow foreign countries to come and fish in our waters. When you look at even the tourism industry, it brings in resources that otherwise wouldn't land into our population, into our economy. But by just preserving the economy along the coastline, and that is including the national parks like the Malindi National Park, the Tsavo National Park, all those contribute to the blue economy, in that you're actually not extracting too much from the environment, but the environment is giving you. By someone just seeing an elephant, he pays you so much in terms of dollars, which is foreign exchange. You're actually maintaining an economy without over-exploiting. That is in contrast now with where you would be mining coal or dredging the ocean for other minerals. And so the blue economy sits very well in our coastline, because it offers those opportunities for the concept of a green stroke blue economy.
Nice. Thank you so much, guys. Of course, I know there's so much you can talk about when you talk about the blue economy. I didn't want to get deeper because, of course, the main thing today is the COP27, the outcomes. But going back to you, Elmawi, right now as we speak, the COP15 on biodiversity is ongoing in Canada, and it has been ongoing for some time now. You can tell us maybe what do you think about this biodiversity issue, because we've lost biodiversity, and part of the discussion at Montreal as of now in Canada concerning the biodiversity COP is the loss of the danger of losing at least 1 million species if we don't take action now to conserve the environment. So can you give us your thought on this, Elmawi?
No, I mean, I've always said that the COP on biodiversity, which is the 15th one that's happening in Canada, in Montreal, is as important as the COP that we're doing on climate change. But unfortunately, our governments, our nations, even including us, the so-called climate activists, we are giving more prevalence to the climate one rather than this one. And for this one, it's even more challenging because Amos will tell you getting a visa from the global south going to Canada is one of the most hectiest of processes you have to go through. I'm told of people who have to wait up to 6 months before they get the visa. So I would assume maybe that's one of the challenges why several people maybe didn't make it. But it's still an important discussion because one, more than a third of the Earth land surface is actually made of forest, which is pretty important. And we have more than about 1.6 billion people who depend on forests as their main source of getting their livelihoods. These are people who are doing it in legal ways, or either they're doing other sorts of economic activities in the forest to make a livelihood. I won't even go a little deeper to talk about the importance of forests when we're talking about climate change and dealing with the climate impact, because forests provide a huge resource as a carbon sink, and my brother has already mentioned around that. And then secondly, it's also the role that forests play in terms of being the buffer on climate impacts and climate shocks. So for instance, if you look at the mangrove forests in Lamu, people will tell you that during the tsunami that was happening, most places within the coastal region were affected, especially those that didn't have good coverage of forests within their shoreline. But if you look at areas like Lamu, where there's a lot of coverage around mangroves, they didn't experience the shocks as much, and therefore were not as impacted. So forests become a key aspect in terms of making sure that people are protected for some of these climate impacts. And then there's the bit that forests play in terms of providing rain and as a source of water. I mean, I was reading a United Nations Environmental Program report this morning, and they were actually mentioning that about half of the world's largest cities are actually supplied by rivers that have traced or traced their water source from the forest. And therefore, if we don't protect this forest, it means more than half of the world's largest cities are actually being threatened. And then finally is also the aspect around how forests are becoming shelters, because there are many people who are living, indigenous communities that are living within forests. And our genius idea of how we're protecting the forest is by what we call the fortress conservation, which actually means that you are closing up the forest and removing everyone else that was actually going to be involved within the forest. And this is really problematic because it's making people becoming displaced, it's affecting people's identity, and it's also an avenue that corrupt government officials and people who are being trusted to protect these resources are using fortress conservation to be able to exploit these trees, cutting them and having a whole line of activity industry to be able to sell these resources. So all of these are many problems that we're having. And I'm hoping that for those who've had the opportunity to go to Canada, we'll be raising them, and we will come up with ways that are adding to our forest population. But in doing it, we're not necessarily affecting the people who have actually been the reason why we still have this forest to begin with.
Thank you. That's quite informative how you brought it. Now, coming into the studio here, Amos, you've worked with farmers. And when you talk about, in connection to what's happening at COP15 on biodiversity, farming is very key, more so when you talk about insects. They're part of our biodiversity, which is highly threatened by human activity. Now, can tell us, what are your thoughts on this, and what should the COP maybe talk about and expectations?
Yeah, the thing is, I think Omar has quite extensively spoken to that, but I think we live in a system that's so interconnected. When we lose a species, it affects the whole system. It destabilizes the whole system. So it's important that we protect our biodiversity so that we are also protected. Like I said, nature nourishes us. So when we protect it, and then we are nourished by it, we are protected by it also from stabilizing services that it gives to humanity. One thing that is very important, I think, is fairness and equitable use of our biological resources. The trend has been, like Omar already alluded to, creating enclosures. We enclose spaces from communities that for a very long time have coexisted with nature. They have protected it, but also benefited from it. I think such systems that exclude stewards from I don't know who or what, the creating parks, for example, that are so protected from the people who have the knowledge of protecting and using it. I think is not a good idea, and we have seen this in many contexts where communities have been displaced for purportedly protection measures. I think these communities need to be protected. Forest communities need to be protected. Communities that depend on seas for fishing need to be protected. We don't need to have marine parks that are excluding fishermen from accessing resources. But because we know these communities have existed with these resources for a well long time, and they know how to sustainably manage these resources. They know when they need to be harvesting and when they need to leave for resources to regenerate. So we cannot purport to come and try to teach these communities on how to manage these resources. They have local knowledge. They have experience that they have gathered over a long time, and they have used these resources for their sustenance. So when we come in with policies and laws that want to exclude these communities from the resources, that's when we have seen problems come in. In agriculture, for example, the introduction of what they are calling modernized agriculture, that is so industrial, that introduces agrochemicals, that introduces genetically modified seeds and things like those. I think we are destroying our ecosystems. We are destroying the system that have sustained farmers. We need to go back to a situation where the nature itself fits into, provides having an agriculture that depends on what is readily available within the system. For example, having farming systems that depend on natural resources that are already available. We have seen situations where various crops are grown together, intercropping, to protect pests for other crops. So I think we need to involve communities as we protect our biological resources.
Nice. That's a good finishing point. Now, Wanjuki, as a scientist, of course, you spoke about the methane gas and other things. In relation to the COP15 on biodiversity, you can tell us, what do you think this COP should focus on, and more so when you talk about the whole range of biodiversity?
Thank you. COP15, the Biodiversity Conference, is happening at a time when a country like Kenya actually was witnessing extraction of bamboo, live plants, and going to other countries with no explanation on why someone needed it. So we actually are not walking the talk. When you look at that conference, the same conference, it is happening when we are actually promoting GMOs. And the reason for doing GMOs is that the weather is so bad, normal crops will not grow. The other reason is there are insects that are eating our maize, and we want to exclude them from disturbing us at the table. And by doing, the only way to do that is to incorporate a genetic material into that plant so that insects that taste it die. It's just very selfish. Even at your home, if I came for a dinner and I saw you treating your cat like that, and a cat is just one member of that family, I would doubt whether you are really genuine about giving me food. So these people are saying that they want GMO to help in sorting out our food distribution, our food security. They are not sincere, because biodiversity is where animals also eat part of that food. In fact, if you find yourself in your own compound, there are no insects and there are no birds. You are the only person. Actually, you are the menu. Someone is preparing you for as a food. Because now coming to the real biodiversity issue, every organism that lived requires to be alive. There is no benefit if you eliminated all the other bad nuisance. We don't like the birds, the insects, the mosquitoes. We would be left with a big problem. In fact, they say that if we didn't have bees for 4 years, there will be no food for humanity, and humanity will just perish. The bee does not look like it's a very important part of the ecosystem, but biodiversity requires that it lives, and you live, and the moment you notice one of the species dying, you should know that that's a trend. Then there will be another one, and you are not different. Humans start to think that they are very special. In fact, we are only 1% of the global biomass. If you are to put all the people together, and it is possible, cannot tell them to come and to come to Kenya, all of them, and we pack ourselves here, we will fit. We are not very many. Starting man to man. But we imagine that we are so special that other animals can go, rhinos can disappear, elephants can disappear, and we are left with just ourselves. It would be a very difficult life if we eliminated biodiversity in this world. And so, and unlike what people would promote even at COP27, that we need to adapt and bring in technologies, we actually supposed to make it so easy for an elephant in a Tsavo to live. And if it is able to live there, you are also likely to live. But if you make all the animals in a national park die, you have one of the animals. You have eliminated your ecosystem. There will be no food. The food you have is plastic, manufactured food, gets into your system, makes you sick, and in the process, you are all facing the same problem. So biodiversity, and this is actually the decade for United Nations decade for biodiversity. It's not been very vocal. I'm thinking that this conference of parties have become just a business opportunities for countries. So they lobby for World Cup to happen in their country. Because I would expect that before COP27, COP15, the one we are talking about, the biodiversity COP, we should have been told which animals are going extinct. How can a farmer in Nyandarua protect an hyena that would be a problem to his farm, but also helps in managing the ecosystem in the Nyandarua mountains. So we don't think that we are special, every other bird can go, but if we can maintain our lifestyle, then we imagine that we are okay. So that's, I didn't see that happen. In fact, COP15 was a surprise to me. There was no pre-conference, awareness. And it's just like it's guys will come, they will pay hotel and accommodation fee, and they go back to their countries. I'm surprised. COP27 was very quiet on the media, and nothing really hit us from there. I saw people playing COP26 videos just to fill the gap, because they didn't feel like it happened to them. And then when you came now to COP15, the one biodiversity, it's also been blacked out from the media. A conference should not happen like this, a conclave for appointing a pope. It should be something that everybody gets involved in. Sorry for using that example.
No, it's okay.
But when you look at the way we are doing it, it's like someone has a secret on how to protect biodiversity, and your idea doesn't count. Nobody has innovated views on how we could protect our ecosystem. And like he says, Amos says, the communities that used to live with those animals, and they have done this for millions of years, have been able to learn how to live with them. Look at our national park here. We have disconnected Nairobi National Park from the Amboseli. by doing farms along the Isinya, Kajiado Central. We have subdivided every piece of land. There are no corridors for animals to move. When you go to Amboseli again, we have left a 100-meter channel to connect Amboseli and the Tsavo National Park. Well, nature required that if an elephant wanted to move from Abadeas, it would go down through Nairobi National Park in Lale for a night. From there it moves to Amboseli, and as it goes down to Tsavo, the mating and the genetic exchange of that happens when a female elephant from Abadeas met with one from Tsavo improves the genetic makeup of the animals. The same was used to happen with the wild beast. Now, wild beasts inside Nairobi National Park actually they are even changing color. They don't seem to be changing genetic material with what the ones that come from Serengeti. And what have we done? We've done the SGL. You can't cross the SGL from all the way from Nairobi all the way to the coast. Crossing over to the other side is very risky for any very risky affair for the animals. So biodiversity shouldn't be seen as something that you can turn on and turn off. It is actually an existential threat to any animal. And so when we do development, I see giraffes from Manzoni, just here in the river, they can no longer access the national park. So they are actually having two populations of giraffe from the national park and another one just less than 10 kilometers away that can never exchange genetic material. So they are actually evolving differently. And nature didn't want things to happen like that. That's why we have migration. For humans, you can go to America, you can go to China, and you can go anywhere. The same for animals. When you talk about biodiversity, the exchange of genetic material should be encouraged by having corridors that allow animals to move across. If it is the worst case scenario, we should relocate elements from Mount Kenya to Tsavo and exchange the other way around. Wow. That's the kind of invention that we should be talking about at the conference. But I'm wondering what will come out of that conference.
That's another one. Wow, thank you guys. That's awesome. Now, the big story of our discussion is the COP27, the outcome of COP27. I know Amos was there, Elmawi was also there. Elmawi, we'll just begin with you. You can tell us, according to you, was this a successful COP? Because much of the things that were spoken in COP27 last month is what we had in Glasgow, save for a few things which of course we'll be talking about later. But you can tell us, was it a success or just another COP?
I'm a bit divided because two things happened. One, we were able to get loss and damage for the first time, to get it discussed, and for countries to unanimously agree to have loss and damage is a key aspect that we have to work on, and that the finances have to be provided. So that was key and important. But I think what we lost was we were clear that we wanted to really win on a conversation around phasing out of fossil fuels. I think they call this COP as the implementation COP or the action COP. And while we were happy when going there, we thought things are going to be implemented. They might have still meant they're implementing something, but I think what they meant implementation for was implementing fossil fuels, because they've refused to agree to phase out fossil fuels. We had the fossil fuel interest represented by the biggest number of people, the delegates who went. I think more than 600 people were from the fossil fuel industry. I didn't see much happening around Africa, despite having a lot of delegates representing us. Kenya, for instance, had over 380 people representing the country, which made it as number 4 globally and the second most represented country within Africa, just after DRC. So I didn't see much of a push around the issues, and I even struggled seeing the 380 something people there. So I assumed maybe a few were actually there for the COP, and maybe others were there for holidays and for tourism and what else, shopping and whatnot. And therefore, for me, these conversations, and Daktari has actually mentioned, the way they're being done in secrecy, because during the COP meetings, there are several things that are happening. We're having the civil society organizations that are going, that are acting as they're observing, but being an observant, it means you have to get access to all the different areas. You cannot necessarily contribute or make your voice heard, but at least all of these areas should be made accessible to you. But much of the important discussions, especially those within governments and the negotiations, are being done in a very secretive manner. If I was to borrow my brother's analogy of a conclave, I think it's even more than that, because no one is allowing you to be inside there. No one knows what's happening. I was even told at some point the presidency was not even sharing some of this information with some of the government representatives. I was told when they're working on the final narrative around the issues, the government representatives, they could not receive the documentation. They had to go to the presidency and someone opens a laptop and you read and you leave it there. So you just leave with the information, but not necessarily with it itself. So it was quite a secretive sort of discussion that was happening. We were not able to really push and make sure that we deal with the fossil fuel phasing out that's supposed to happen. And it makes me get worried, because next year, this is going to be happening in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. And what it actually means is now the two presidency will be for Egypt and Dubai. And therefore, I mean, I'm super worried about how that will look like, because the interest around fossil fuels within these countries is significant. And in my mind, you don't put a meeting where there is conflict. I mean, if I am to do something, or if I'm to find my daughter a husband, I wouldn't necessarily be looking for the criminals out of them or people who have some tricky background. And therefore, if you are trying to have a conversation around phasing out of fossil fuels, the place to do it won't be where fossil fuels is the main driver of the economy and revenue around these areas.
When you talk about loss and damage being adopted this time around as a point of whatever reference, or the part of the talk which was ongoing, to many it feels like it was a good thing, or it was a plus now that it has been adopted or spoken about, and some agreements were made. But when you look at the agreement which was made, it's not clear which countries or who are going to benefit from this and who is funding this. The commitment is lacking. And again, you remember the $100 billion again issue is still hanging. If they have not yet honored the $100 billion for the last 10 years, do you think this time around they're going to adopt their loss and damage and do something about it?
So I agree with you. It's good that finally they've acknowledged that there's loss and damage that's happening, and we need to provide a facility to be able to deal with that. But that doesn't get anywhere in terms of us getting to resolve the problem that we're in. A big part of the problem, why we're seeing loss and damage was a big issue, is because governments they thought by agreeing to loss and damage, they will actually be confessing to liability, and they were worried about the can of worm that will be opening if they sort of in some ways agreed that they've caused the climate crisis that we're in today. Because with loss and damage, and what's happening is that the global north have contributed the most to the climate crisis that we're in today, the historical carbon emissions, carbon dioxide emissions. And then the global south, especially within Africa, have contributed very little to the problems that you're in today, but they're one of the most affected, most vulnerable areas, because of they're not able to really be resilient, they're not able to adapt and mitigate, and also because we are poor, so we cannot necessarily be able to put in some of the measures to be able to cope with some of these processes, and therefore, celebrating at this juncture will in many ways it won't be the wisest thing to do, because what we have is just a promise. It's just an agreement that we need to provide something for loss and damage. We still need to know how much money is going to be provided. We need to know who's going to be providing it. And one of my biggest problems I've had with especially the United Nations Framework Convention or climate change conventions is the fact that these agreements are also not binding. I mean, countries can commit, they can make promises, but they can always get out of them. They can always not deliver, and there's really nothing that you can do about it. I think it's high time that us, as communities that are affected the most by some of these climate impacts, we have to find ways of pushing back and making sure that they know if you make a promise, if you make a commitment, then we actually going to make sure that you actually make good on your promise. This could take different ways. I mean, if we have to litigate against some of these promises, if we have to name and shame, I think all of these are options that we can have. And then finally is also another group of people that we really don't speak about as often as we should, because the biggest cause of the climate crisis is carbon emissions, and much of it is coming from fossil fuels. And the biggest people who are pushing on fossil fuels are actually companies and corporates. And these are people who've benefited a lot from the same. I think it's high time now that we tax them and make sure that they pay all of these damages that they've done from before. And in all these resources providing them, we shouldn't continue with the current modus operandi where we are giving it to communities, we're giving it to countries as loans, but we need to give it as financing. We need to youth in the best manner, shape, and form in terms of what will actually be the best thing to provide for them for climate impacts within the countries. It shouldn't be about countries using it as a way of pushing their own interest, as a way of pushing whatever they want to see within these countries, where they're saying, you know, we are financing this and that, well, necessarily they should be giving unconditional grants for us to be able to really push ahead. And then finally is the aspect around who benefits. Because currently I'm told there's a debate around what they call the vulnerable countries, climate vulnerable countries. And when I was at COP27, I was shocked to learn that Pakistan is not considered as one of the vulnerable countries, when actually just this year, more than a third of the country was underwater because of the floods that are happening. I mean, then what is the definition of a vulnerable country? We need to make sure that we're looking at it in an equitable manner. We need to make sure that these resources are provided within different areas in an equitable manner. And we also need ways to make sure that we follow up and enforce some of these promises that are being made. Otherwise, you know, we'll keep doing things the same way and expecting a different result. And that's the true definition of insanity.
Well done, well explained. Actually, Amos, now you were on the ground.
Yes.
And did we succeed? Because this COP was labeled as the African COP and, of course, implementation COP. But people felt that now that it is happening in Africa, and more so on the part of loss and damage, and more so on the issue of the $100 billion, which has been an issue for the last 10 years, many felt that this time around things will change.
Yeah.
We saw big promises from the likes of US President and others. Now, did we succeed this time around?
What I would say is that what happened in Sharm El-Sheikh, I would tell it was a tale of two COPs in Sharm El-Sheikh. Mm-hmm. Two COPs because, for once, vulnerable countries for over 30 years of these discussions have been calling for a facility that can help them rebuild their lives and livelihoods after disasters. And for once, governments, countries agreed to have a vessel in the name of Loss and Damage Fund. Even though we do not have the money yet, even though they have not finalized on various key elements, but I think just having that vehicle where we can now start thinking of having a facility that can enable communities that have been have lost and have been damaged by climate-related disasters, I think is very important. And for once, this sends a message to the polluters that in the end they'll have to pay for the pollution. I hope that as we try to find a way of financing the facility or funding the facility, finding resources for the fund, we are going to tax the polluter. That we can have a carbon tax. That those who have got us into this mess are made to pay. Historical polluters have to pay. They have a responsibility. They owe vulnerable countries a climate debt. And I think I'm happy that these discussions have started and we have a fund established and that can help.
But Amos, my feeling, is that this you mentioned about this the vehicle which has been created per se, which you're talking about. But I have an issue because now this is a second vehicle in 10 years, because the $100 billion funding which was supposed to be given out has remained just a promise. Like Elmawi mentioned about legal binding framework lacks in the whole of this discussion. Now this is another vehicle which we are now beginning again. Now do you think it's just going to be an empty vehicle, because there's another one we've been pulling for the last 10 years, there's nothing to smile about, and now we began another vehicle again, we're manufacturing another vehicle called loss and damage. Do you think it's going to be different?
Yeah, it's true that in 2009 historical polluters came up, they themselves, and said, okay, we are going to be giving 100 billion every year by 2020 to be able to help with dealing with the climate change. They haven't honored that. There are discussions already around adaptation. The fund, the 100 billion. You see, within the 100 billion, majority of the money was going to go into mitigation. And there are discussions that communities are already facing a lot of impacts. Communities are living with disasters every day. They need to be helped to be resilient to these disasters. So there are discussions that, because previously only 25% was going into adaptation. So they need to double that, so that a half of the money goes into mitigation and a half of the money goes into adaptation. That is happening. We had to come out of this COP with a global goal on adaptation, clear plans on how we are going to approach adaptation. Now we were going into this COP. Actually, loss and damage was not in the agenda. So vulnerable countries had to, first of all, bargain to have loss and damage into the agenda. Actually, getting loss and damage on the agenda was a difficult thing. And these things have been happening for quite a long period. So that's why I say it's better to have this facility that we can now haggle around, we can negotiate, rather than having nothing. That's why I say it was monumental for me as something that was achieved. And for it to happen in a COP that's taking place on a region that is being affected disproportionately by climate crisis, that is more vulnerable, for it to happen in Africa, I think this is something to celebrate, that an African COP has bore a loss and damage fund facility. I said there were two tales of COP27 in Sharm El-Sheikh. The second COP the story about COP27 is that I had never imagined that in a health conference that would have tobacco lobbyists around trying to promote their products. In Sharm El-Sheikh, we had so many fossil fuel lobbyists. Even OPEC had a pavilion in the COP. We all know that we are in the climate crisis because of the fossil fuel energy regime. Fossil fuels have put our planet on fire. Having so many lobbyists, for me, it was a failure. But also, even though we had 80 countries agreeing on a text that will face down all fossil fuels. You see, in Glasgow last year, there was an agreement to face down unabated coal. This time round in Sharm El-Sheikh, India, led by India, they are saying, why discriminate? Why can't we have a text that speaks to all fossil fuels, that is coal, oil and gas? And this was agreed by 80 countries. But I think it's a shame that all the countries could not agree to have that in the final text. Because we know that if we were to deal with the issue of climate change, then we must begin by dealing with the issue of fossil fuels. for continents like Africa that have not contributed to the problem but are suffering the problem, I think the text around just energy transition and renewables, I think it's also something to celebrate because that came out in the final decision. But another thing is, for the first time, you see multinational development banks, like the World Bank, like the Africa Development Banks, have been investing in fossil fuels. But for the first time also in Sharm El-Sheikh, we got a text countries calling on multinational development banks to reform their investment plans, to invest more in renewables. And for us to shift away from fossil fuels, we will need investments in renewables. So having a text that calls on World Banks, IMF, and Africa Development Banks to shift the investments to renewables was another success.
Wow.
So these are things that we are not looking at.
Okay.
We might not have got a text on phasing out coal, oil, and gas, but we have got a text promoting renewables, which is very important. Africa has abundant renewable energy resources. 60% of the best solar resources are in Africa. 40% of all renewable energy resources are in Africa. So having a decision that promotes investment in these African resources is, I think, a win. And having that happen for the first time in Sharm El-Sheikh is a success. So that's why I say, even though we didn't win fully, there are wins to celebrate.
Yeah.
We didn't lose it.
Wow. So it was a win-win. There's something to talk about after 2 weeks of discussions. Now, thank you. Elmawi has just left for another meeting. We appreciate your time with us, Elmawi. Of course, we'll be discussing this more and more. Now, back to studio. Now, Wanjuki, I was a bit concerned because you saw it. Some of the bigger corporates, or big corporates who are funding, supporting, or of course offering financing for the COP27, are people who are polluters, like he's saying, and talking about now having a tax for polluters. I was a bit concerned. Would that maybe have twist the discussion? Because I'm giving you something, because of something, to talk about something, or I'm funding you for a course, and I'm the problem behind the scenes. Because many of them are the highest polluters, especially when you talk about plastic pollution, which is threatening our oceans. By 2050, they've told us we have more plastics in the ocean than fish. Now, don't you think could that maybe have twisted the way of discussion?
Thank you. And like for you guys who went to Sharm El-Sheikh, many of us who were left behind here thought that the Sharm El-Sheikh was actually a sham. And okay, maybe you got a better view because you are closer to the source. Huh?
Yes.
The truth is, if you want to ban payment of dowry, the last place you'd want to have that meeting is at your father-in-law's, because he may not support
the idea.
Yeah. So when COP27 happened in the Middle East, that area depends on oil, and everything about the economy is on oil.
Yes, yes.
Anything that goes against oil will never get any support. I'm so even surprised because I didn't know the next COP would take place in
the
Dubai.
same region again.
An economy completely supported, 100% supported by oil.
Oil, yes.
They may be transitioning to transport and tourism, but take away oil, they are completely gone. Instead of going to Kisumu and telling people not to be doing fish, they may not support you. Can you now start doing doma and guashe instead of fish? And so that conversation will not get the support you require. So actually, the location was wrong, the venue. And even I'm surprised that the next one is also around there. Because there is no way the economies around that area would support a ban on fossil fuels. The other part is that the sponsors of the events are heavy producers of single-use plastic, bottled drinks. And there's no way they will support anything that would affect their bottom line. And so I heard it from Elmawi that the conference was padlocked. We couldn't go to the other side. And, so we actually were being controlled. Someone was controlling our listening, our actions. And so that's another negative from COP27. We did not hear those fiery speeches that came from Glasgow. Then coming to the financing, 2015, a COP that happened, I think, in France, Italy, is when we were promised money.
Yes.
If I promise you 100 shillings for every slap I slap you, you may enjoy the slap, but surely that's not the best way to get rich. And we are being told we'll be slapped with $100. We'll be slapped
100 billion.
and we'll be given 100 billion for the slap. 100 billion is very little money, by the way, when you consider the economy of Kenya, Africa.
Africa is.
And most of those resources actually coming from Africa, they go and modify them, process them, and then they bring us the $100 billion. How much have they taken out of our country by the time they give us $100 million? We should not even look at that money. In fact, I am against that kind of reparations. If my house is burning, it does not matter whether niko na deni yako. I should invite you to come with a bucket of water to put off the fire, to put out the fire. What is happening is we are being told, okay, your house can burn, but we'll give you some money. What value can you give? If you give us money today, what do our grandchildren think of us? We were actually bought into selling our future, because that's what's happening. I'm one person who's against even what they call adaptation and mitigation. Adaptation, no. We shouldn't adapt to climate change. We should resist climate change by actually reducing the methane gases that's going to the environment, by reducing the fossil fuels, not reducing, do away with them. We could in Africa produce enough firewood to fire the whole world. Our Sahara Desert, it's not a design. God didn't decide a desert in Africa. Actually, many people who have gone to the Sahara say there are tree stumps, there are lakes and even coral reefs within the savannah, within the Sahara Desert. Meaning, in the creation of the world, the Sahara Desert was not a desert. We have encouraged the idea that Africa is poor because we can't do crops. We are now depending on food from outside the continent. Yet our country, every inch of our country can grow food throughout the year. We don't even require special conditions to grow. We don't require greenhouses. We just do grow cultivation. What is happening with our water? We empty our water from our rivers or into the ocean with the fertilizer or any good thing that is there, and we are ready to go back to Europe and buy fertilizer. How do we my issue here is, what would you do with the $100 billion in Africa for a year, or even what we are given? It was 320 million that was promised to our president. What would you do it? Pump it into one of the funds and the circulating fund. Will it affect the climate? No. Money is not the issue. We should actually be addressing practical ways of absorbing carbon from the environment, not just for Kenya, but the whole of the world. Let there not be someone who says, okay, as long as I'm making money, I can pay Dan to keep quiet. That is never. That's, as an environmentalist, the money is not the issue. It is us changing the climate, preventing the climate going to 1.5 degrees. By the way, we have already exceeded the 1.5. We were promised there will be droughts in 2035. They happened in 2020 and 2021. So meaning even scientists cannot be able to predict the trend in the climate change. who is going to pay? Of the $100 billion, who will be paid how much? What will it be used for? What technologies are we adapting? Most of the technologies that I heard being sold in Sharm El-Sheikh, the COP27, were, we'll supply solar panels to Africa. Why supply solar panels to Africa? Yet Kenya has soda ash. We have sand from Isinya that is used for making glass. So what we need from Europe is a small proportion of that material that is used for capturing the light. But we can do the glass, we can do the panel. Where we being promised equipment to be transported from Europe to Africa to help us adapt. We should be producing. Most those companies should actually be relocating to Africa, where we have resources. We have soda ash. Kenya produces 75% of soda ash in the world. Why isn't nobody telling us? Kenya's contribution to climate change is that soda ash from Lake Magadi will be used to make billions of solar panels that will be placed in Sahara Desert, and we can sell energy to Europe, which is just across the lake, the ocean. Mediterranean Ocean. We are not told that. We are told we will receive electric cars, all manufactured in Europe. We will get energy-saving bulbs. The vacuum inside the bulb is actually not even from Kenya. It's imported. I'm talking about the vacuum being imported. Yeah. So actually, there's nothing for you in terms of our production. Our youth won't get any jobs. Why are we talking about electric vehicles without talking about our resources from Dogokundu, Kwale County, where we produce niobium. Niobium is the material used for making wiring for electric vehicles. What do? We put it in a 10-ton truck, scoop it and take it to the ocean, send it to other countries. Why are we not trying to look at opportunities for us as Africa that we can influence and actually control the next economy, the green economy? Talk about the circular economy. What are you telling women groups? We'll start groups that you can do table banking, be collecting plastic along the ocean, the shoreline. That's not where we should be. We should be talking about how Kenya produces glass for the whole, glass, for the whole world. Because we have sand, we have soda ash, and the other component is energy, which we are not getting enough of from local supply. Can we get energy that can be used for making glass, so that companies that are doing beverages don't do them in plastic, but instead do them on recyclable glass that have a low carbon footprint, and also will not persist in the environment to cause problems to other organisms. So it's actually our look. We went to the wrong concept. Using the marriage process. If you go to pay dowry, you can be given so many conditions, but none of those conditions tell you not to go home with your wife. It's something optional.
You choose to go with your wife, or you conditions?
The condition about not going with the wife is not normally there. Nothing stops you, but you are normally advised, tutahitaji pesa fulani, which was used for something.
For education, for water.
You may pay the following week, or in the next 10 years, nothing happens to you. There's nothing binding the European country or the West, the developed West, even China or whatever, to pay us the 100 billion. Nothing. Even the new fund, there's nothing binding them to pay us. It's just like
they choose to or not.
It's optional. If I feel like the economy is not doing well.
Does this then mean, is there then need to have these COPs, so to speak? Because if number one, we have no legal a framework binding these discussions and these promises and these commitments, then do we need to go back then to the drawing board and come up with these things first? Because it's like building a house without a foundation. so to speak, from what I'm understanding from you, like building this house without foundation, because the legal framework should be not the foundation holding these COPs or these conference of parties, whereby now when someone commits to this and this and this, there's legal framework which can follow up with them if they don't do that. So do you think we need to go back to the drawing board again before we go to the upcoming COPs 28, 29 moving forward? Before I come to you, Amos.
The unfortunate thing is that there is no guarantee that can guarantee an international guarantee. So you are cooked. There's nothing that can help you there. You can't, even if America promised you the 100 billion the next year, if they don't do that, where will you take them?
That's it. Yeah.
So, for that reason, we cannot depend on those promises. We should instead focus on our own action, whatever action that is yielding. If we in Africa we feel like planting a lot of mangroves, like we said, or bamboo, or madanga tree, the tree that grows in Garissa and has this year helped actually ameliorate the drought, make the drought not so severe in Garissa because there was still vegetation. We should concentrate on changing. It is not a scientific, there's not even an equipment that can be manufactured to help stop climate change. The best is planting trees. We should stop extraction of those fossil fuels, and then focus ourselves on, if you can do electric cars, Africa would do very well with electric cars. But governments depend, and just like the Middle East, they depend so much on oil. The same government depends so much on oil for taxation. So they are never ready to actually make very hard decisions that can lead to the elimination of fossil fuels.
It's a good chase.
Yeah, the same story. Your father-in-law is not the best person to be at the table when you are discussing the loss of dowry or banning of dowry.
Now, Amos, there's one thing which came up at the COP. For the first time, we had a pavilion on children and the youth at the COP. This at least we saw something different this time around.
Yes.
Do you think this is a good move, maybe looking at the next generation when it comes to the effect of climate?
Yeah, the thing is, and I'll go back a little bit on whether we still need COPs or not.
Yes.
The thing is, a global challenge of the magnitude of the climate crisis cannot be solved by an individual country. We need global solidarity. We need efforts at all levels, from local level, having these community resilient programs, to a global level decisions. The problem is that Africa hasn't internalized that climate negotiations are political, highly political. We are still sending our ministers for environment when other countries are sending their foreign affairs ministers who understand foreign policy.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's where we failed, because in these discussions we dwell very much on ecology, but I think climate discussions are socio-political. We need to really present our interests. Like Dan clearly puts, Africa will need close to $3.8 trillion to be able to develop systems that would enable it to be resilient, energy systems. Actually, the 100 billion that was promised was not based on any assessment, leave alone that they have not delivered. So the thing is, Africa needs to identify its own interests. Africa needs to develop its own development model that it needs to follow and become a world leader. We are lucky that we have the best resources. Talk about critical minerals that are needed to develop technologies for renewables are in Africa. But the problem is we are used to exporting low value raw materials and importing back high value. And that's what keeps Africa in a cyclic dependence and poverty. We are not poor. It's only that we have not established our power to participate in the full value chain of our resources. Why would Nigeria export crude oil and import refined oil, for example? So those are the things that we need to be addressing internally, but also as we get into these spaces, we need to articulate our interests clearly. And for Africa to be able to deal with the crisis, the climate crisis, it will need three things. One, Africa will need to demand the climate debt owed to it by historical polluters. Because we are talking about developing our energy systems. That will need investments. We do not have that money. That money will have to come from somewhere. And what has been happening recently is that we are having initiatives that are bringing money on the continent, but mostly in terms of loans, which is problematic. Sovereign loans, commercial loans, they are very problematic because they attract high interest. What is needed is financing facilities that will not overburden Africa with debts as Africa develops systems of the future, as Africa develops systems that would help it deal with the crisis that it's presented with. Number two, we'll need technological transfer. We have resources, yes, we do not have the technology. We will need that technological transfer, and this will need cooperation and partnerships with countries that own these technologies. And what we've been calling for is we should not have another COVID vaccine apartheid. That the important technologies that will help Africa transition, that will help Africa build renewable systems, have to be open source. They have to be openly available. We should not be having intellectual properties on critical necessary technologies that will help us fix the climate challenge. Because what that does is disadvantages countries that do not have the financial muscle. Number three, Africa will need capacity building and skills development. That through this partnership that we are going to be negotiating and the cooperations between the North and the South, our people need to be skilled so that we do not just export raw materials, but they participate fully in the value chain. Today, if you ask people to participate fully in green hydrogen, for example, economy, do we have those skills? We do not have. So we will need capacity building on the continent. So those are the things that when we get into these spaces, we should be demanding for. That you owe us climate debt. You can repay that through technology transfer, through making available enough funds, not just those pledges that are made out of no assessment, funds based on available data. Then you will need to help us skill our people.
Wow. Actually, on green hydrogen, the president spoke about it during the COP in his speech. You can just briefly mention about it, the green hydrogen in Kenya and what that means.
What has been happening across the continent is that there has already been discussions. And there are two things here. Green hydrogen can either help Africa roll out renewables on a large scale and very quickly, and for a country like Kenya, it can help us stabilize our grid system. We can store excess power generated from renewables in a hydrogen molecule that can be used later when there is peak demand. So Kenya is part of the initial 10 African countries that have formed the Africa Green Hydrogen Alliance. The intention of the Africa Green Hydrogen Alliance is to consolidate African capacities and efforts in developing a green hydrogen economy on the continent. Namibia already signing agreements, Mauritania, but Kenya has not entered into any agreement yet, but we are part of the alliance. The reason is that Kenya wants to use its excess power to store in a hydrogen molecule. The good thing about Kenya is not for export. Because if green hydrogen is going to be built on an export-oriented model, then what we are doing is we have just found another way of exporting our renewables, like we did with oil and gas, which is problematic. We need to build green hydrogen economy to benefit Africa. The Sahel, huge potential for solar that can power the whole continent and share with the world. We have huge potential for wind. We have huge potential for hydro. We have huge potential for geothermal here in Africa, Kenya. So we have the critical minerals needed to develop the technologies. We have a youthful population that is very vibrant. Africa has all these opportunities and capacities. What is stopping us is leadership. Now, the change in Africa will not happen unilaterally. It will come from all directions. And that's why it was exciting that we had a pavilion for the youth and children. Our youth have been very active in pushing out the climate agenda. Elizabeth Watuti, Vanessa, Fridays for the Future.
The young guy.
Iman.
From here in Eastlands.
So there are so many useful people, and they are doing amazing work. They are mobilizing. They are planting trees. They are having conversations. They are reminding the political leadership of their responsibilities. But we also have the civil society. It's unfortunate that Omar has left. Omar is convening an Africa climate movement space that is bringing together feminists, faith leaders, farmers, everyone, energy experts into one tent to develop a model that is fit for purpose for Africa. And I think these efforts from civil society, from youth groups, if they can be complemented with African institutional arrangements, like the Africa Group of Negotiators, the AMSETs, I think Africa can get into these international debates, these international discussions, these international spaces with a strong common position that can help it come out of these discussions with something to take home.
Wow. Now, I think this discussion on environment, we can talk about the whole day, the whole night, because you guys are passionate about it, and you found someone else who is passionate about it. That is myself. Sorry to brag about it, but this is where we are. This is our work. But as we wind up, maybe Wanjuki, you can briefly tell us now. He spoke about green hydrogen. You can just, because being a scientist, science was not a subject for everyone in school. And that is why some of us were behind the microphones, because you could not do it. Now you can just briefly break it down for us and tell us what could this mean for the nation of Kenya. Of course, he has mentioned something, but maybe you can add something to it before we call it a day.
The interesting part is that the patent for making hydrogen from water using electricity is under my name. I actually did a patent in 2010 for generation of hydrogen on board your vehicle, and I was actually, it was in the newspaper on the 22nd of February 2010, the Nation newspaper, and it said, you can drive your vehicle with literally no fuel. When I did that, and the patent actually is in my name, but I also had co-opted someone in America just to look bigger. And then the government didn't take an interest.
Wow.
I took it to several offices. The last one is when I was told, the one that broke my spirit completely is when I was told, Kenya has just discovered Gamia 2. There's no way you can now bring the story of us doing hydrogen.
Hydrogen, yes.
let us first of all
do the fuel.
join the League of Oil Producing Countries.
Oil
Actually, the
producers.
word was we have just joined the League of Oil Producing Countries.
Mm.
You cannot now bring the story of hydrogen.
Oh.
Other countries have taken that technology, like now you can get hydrogen hybrid vehicles.
Mm.
But the patent is at the Kenya Intellectual Property Office.
Mm.
I have tried to go out, but like you said, and many of my technologies, actually my innovations, they are not. Don't wrap it in a patent and it's just say, oh, I'm the one. I normally publish it and make it free.
Mm.
If Kenya would want to do hydrogen fuel, okay, like solar during the day, you use that, make manufacture hydrogen, separate hydrogen and oxygen, use oxygen for medical purpose, but the hydrogen is meant for, you can constitute it as in a way of generating electricity, not the fuel cell that is requires a lot of technology to manufacture, but it basically just burn it like fuel. You just burn it. In my vehicle, I would burn fuel back into hydrogen, back into water.
Mm.
And actually, the name of the patent was the Rainmaker.
Mm-hmm.
I was making rain by driving my Land Rover. It generates steam at the back, not steam, actually droplets that can actually. This is a technology that is in Kenya, but the wiring is that nothing comes from the south, and if it comes, because I've had a conversation with high level officials at UNEP, but they didn't seem to. It didn't seem to sit well. How did it happen that you have this kind of? And
You saw it ahead.
The way we treat
Yes.
our technologists is that
Yes.
if he claimed that he was the owner of a technology, the first thing would be to go asking everybody around this room, is this really his or is it yours? Is it yours? Or is it his?
Yeah.
So like mtoto amezaliwa Pamwani, the first, instead of assigning the name to the lady who is holding the baby, we first of all go asking everybody around whether that could be their child, their baby.
Mm.
That's the technology. That's how we do ourselves.
Mm.
If I've done several patents, up to 7,
Mm.
but many of them I'm not matured, because you do it and then they're still looking around the world to see whether it could have been stolen from somewhere. And so you could be actually, you are viewed as a pirate. So what do? Next time you don't even publish it. So the technology on hydrogen fuel, which we can actually roll out, I have actually recruited some people in Eurocaral who can do the hydrogen fuel. Someone just came and said he wanted, I gave him the technology on how to generate, to make those equipment. I have a few workshops that can do that. But where's the government looking?
The West.
To the West. On the methane abatement technology, which is quite it should be a headline in our newspapers. It is not. Yet, the Americas, United Nations, has seen the potential in our product that we are able to eliminate methane gas from decomposition. What do you have now? We will be looking for technology that will come from the West at an exorbitant price, a machine that is said to be able to pull out carbon from the environment. Don't pull out carbon. That's a plant job. Methane gas is a problem. We have a way of eliminating it. I showed you a certificate issued by an international jurist who actually identified that technology as the most mass deployable. It can be deployed anywhere in the country within a week if it was required, anywhere in the world. But nobody will talk about it because this is based on nature, and nature is not patentable. If you can't patent something, you can't call for those royalties. So most of the European, the Western countries or the developed countries don't want technologies that are not patentable or that are not lab-made. Yeah? They want something that you can claim, oh, we are the only guys who can do electric cars. What if a technology is made free to people? Like anybody in Mukuru kwa Jenga can learn that system, do it, anybody in another town in Tanzania or the Americas would do it. But and that's the other part of the failure of Sharm El-Sheikh. We allowed the corporates to run the show. Corporates will never let something free happen. I don't know whether Dan or Amos, you encountered what was called World Space. There was a radio receiver called World Space Receiver. It was a free to air, free to receive. You could receive email on that handset. I could receive data. You could receive CNN. You could receive TVs from all over the world, BBC, whatever. It was free. What did you do? What happens? It was not supported. Because there was no, the commercial part, the owner of the project had actually sidestepped the commercial part where we want to make money, and so it actually failed on that aspect only. The same with our technology, it will not fly because it does not make some corporates which have hosted guys from America who wanted to buy the technology. But then I said, what will ever come from Africa if not this?
Yeah. Wow. I think we can discuss the whole day, but I want just briefly, maybe for like a few seconds, you can give us your parting shot, Amos, about the whole discussion and the whole issue of COP27, as we call it today.
Yeah, just a quick one is that Omar mentioned that we had about 380 something delegates from Kenya. I think this is enough capacity to be able to influence these processes. What needs to be done is early planning. We need to engage everyone. Media was there, of course, complementing the work that was being done by negotiators, complementing the work that was being done by activists. You were taking out the message and outside track influencing the whole process. I think if we can start earlier engagements among various actors so that by the time we are getting to the COP, everyone is prepared. Media knows the kind of narrative that we are pushing.
Yes. Sure.
Negotiators know the interests of Africa. Everyone, the activists know, and they are in sync. I think we will start influencing these processes. Organization is very important, but we need to start organizing from home. Africa needs to put its acts together if we are to make the difference.
Wow. Awesome. Daniel, finishing.
Thank you. The work I've done on climate change, starting from the hydrogen fuel concept, the methane abatement needs to go out there. That's why I thought COP27 would have offered Kenya an opportunity, not myself, Kenya, an opportunity to boast that we have actually cracked the most difficult part of energy, which is hydrogen. Hydrogen is thought to be one of the cheapest and safest in terms of environment. Environmental is very safe because the byproduct is water. When you come to methane gas abatement, we actually even stretching the horizon from just doing wastewater management or waste in general to actually incorporating our product, eco-treatment digester, into animal feeds that actually stop animal from actually belching methane gas. It's something I wouldn't want to be the one to champion. I would wish the government would take place and run with it, because after all, even if we did have several patents on the same, and we were not able to deploy it ourselves, it would also mean that next drought that is coming in 2 years, and it has to be there will be a drought in 2024, 2025. It will still find us in the same situation we were this year, where we were not able to feed ourselves. So if we are able to deploy technologies now that can help us change the trend on climate change, reverse the 1.5 degrees. For last year, it's actually almost going to 4 degrees. What we had the last few months was indicative of not 1.5 degrees increase, but 4 plus. But the funny thing with the environment or the scientists is that we take the average. So we take the average temperature of the world, and like they say, scientists say that if you have head in the fridge and a feet in the oven, you are doing okay because the average is fair enough. So you'll not, you'll still be, scientifically you are okay. Currently, Africa is in the oven.
In the oven, yes.
Europe is in the fridge.
In the fridge.
But when you take the average, it looks like we are okay. So we need the world to know that it's even the issue of reparations that shouldn't come in first. If the house is on fire, put out the fire, then later on I can talk about how much you owed me or but in the initial, right now the conversation should not be about how technologies will be deployed for commercial purpose, how investment will be directed to the south. The issue now is how do we reduce the carbon in the environment, and if it's by planting dengue, let's plant dengue every inch of the world. If it is able to absorb enough of that carbon in the environment, then we can now sit down in the table and ask, from here going forward, how are we going to reduce carbon emissions? And if it requires that he stops extracting fossil fuels, and instead we supply them with geothermal, because we can do geothermal from the whole of Rift Valley, from Mozambique to Israel. It's a geothermal potential area. If we did every other 3 kilometers or 30 kilometers a geothermal system, and then we put a good line, distribution line to Europe, then we would stop them from using gas to warm their houses, because we don't want them to die also of cold. We want them to warm their houses, but not with fossil fuels. They can use electricity from our side. And if we find that transporting electricity from Kenya to all the way to Europe, the losses along the channel is too high, let's do hydrogen pipeline. Let them make their electricity from the other end after you have transported the hydrogen generated from solar on this other side. That's the kind of reasoning that we need to encourage in the next COP. But if the COP is based on tourism for our executives and nice photography sites, and I'm not saying it, but that we will have lost the focus that surrounds our survival. Because here it's not, they say there's a time when things are so serious, you actually even don't care who is helping you put out fire in your house. It could be your enemy.
It could be even dirty water.
Yeah, you could even use that
as long
water
as it's
to
water.
put out the fire.
Yes.
So if we keep on now doing those papers on the best way to do transfer of technology to Africa and make a profit for companies in Europe, so there will be a time when money will not be of any use. We saw it during COVID. Money didn't help people. Yeah. So if imagine COVID was a continuous drought, like we have had in the last 6 months, money wouldn't buy anything because even the neighbor didn't have anything to sell to you. So can we change our minds, focus on survival now for the whole world, and then later on we can go back to our commercial settings.
Okay. Wonderful. Man, you guys can speak about this the whole day, because I love the passion. I actually, Daniel, you've opened my mind today on what Africa can do to the Europe, instead of Africa waiting for Europe to. And that's where we have a challenge, because us in Africa many times we feel, what can they do for us? Time has come for us to think, what can we do for them? And we have the resources, we have everything in Africa which can help us to do that. Gentlemen, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much, Amos, for finding time. Of course, I know we disrupted your program, but of course, it is necessary to talk about these things any day, any time. Thank you so much, Mr. Wanjuki, for finding time to speak to us. Of course, the conversation continues, because We want to make sure that these discussions about our economies, about our climate in Africa is told and spoken about in every part of this continent, because Africa is where we belong and this is our continent. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful discussion on the issues affecting the continent of Africa, and more so on the just concluded COP27. We were trying to see, was it a success? Was it a failure? We've heard from our wonderful guests whom we had in studio today. There's Amos Wemanya from PowerShift Africa and Daniel Wanjuki from EcoSafe Africa, and our friend all the way from Mombasa, Omar Elmawi, who had to step out for another engagement. But from our desk, Eco Climate Platform, this is where we're discussing matters Africa and for Africa, because climate is here with us and we must do something about it. See you next time. My name is Dan Kaburu. This was our wonderful show on environment for Africa. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks so much.